Well, good morning, everyone. Let me advance the slide here. So my name is Aaron Chaletsky, and I'm the head of the Reformatting Project section in the Preservation Services Division. The programs and processes outlined in this presentation apply only to the Preservation Services Division. There are other LC digitization initiatives which might utilize similar collections and have similar processes. Many do not. So I just wanted to be clear that what I'm presenting today pertains exclusively to my division. So here's a quick overview of the Preservation Services Division. We have primary responsibility for providing large-scale preservation services to the library, which requires maintaining its collections in usable formats. In support of this, our expert staff create and maintain the management information systems required to manage the preservation services and provide skills in preservation assessment and planning, contract administration, and project management. We provide reformatting of information from high-risk or at-risk materials and reformat them to more stable formats. We also provide aftermarket binding from library materials. Our division provides business support services for contracts to to all of the preservation divisions. And we develop and maintain management information systems, databases, et cetera, for effective operations of preservation activities all across the Preservation Directorate. Okay, so what you're seeing here is a standardized, what we call bag. This is sort of an inventory system that we use for all of our digitization initiatives, whether it's brittle books, newspapers, microfilm, tangible media in some cases where it applies. So the bag structure is something that we use for public presentations. We also have a rights restricted presentation at the Library of Congress, which is restricted to on-campus only for copyrighted materials. Again, so depending on the copyright status of a given collection, we will either use this structure for public presentation and or private presentation with the intention of migrating it to public presentation when it ultimately becomes public domain. For those of you who have been in the digital preservation game for a while, you'll notice that we don't use a TIFF master. This is something that the library has migrated away from, not entirely at this point, but Preservation Services has migrated away from using the TIFF master JPEG derivative. We developed this JPEG master specification, which utilizes a 20-to-1 compression rate. We developed this several years ago in support of our newspaper digitization pilot, which has now become a digitization program. So we use the JPEG master, JPEG 2 master with a JPEG derivative. And for rights restricted materials, we use a PDFA presentation. These new file formats save a tremendous amount of server space, which a number of you, I'm sure, can attest is quite expensive. So we find that it's far more efficient, it's extraordinarily stable, and it works very well for us. Again, as I think I've mentioned, we do use this bag structure across all the different projects that we have. And let's move on to our brittle books digitization. So the Preservation Services Division works predominantly with the general collections. We work very closely with our Collections Management Division. In some cases, we may work with other parts of the library to reformat some of their at-risk materials. We do some work with the Law Library of Congress. We have worked with quite a number of other area studies divisions, European division, for instance, to digitize a number of their collection items that they believe to be at risk. And at risk here in this case, as these pictures might show, these are at risk of, well, being falling apart in some cases, and most of these materials are no longer served to the public because of their condition. Many of them could have spinal damage. They may be missing pages in some cases. Covers are loose. Quite a number of them from the early 20th century, late 19th century. If they haven't been treated for deacidification, the pages are yellowed. They're very brittle in many cases. And some of the books also have quite a bit of leather rot. So the photos that you're seeing here are pretty representative of the condition that the items that the items are in when they arrive in our spaces. We can digitize in our current contract up to a folio size. This was something that we hadn't been able to do under previous contracts. So one of the issues for the general collections, of course, is that there are quite a number of folio size items that are also at risk of no longer being served to the public. They are also in deteriorating condition. And so we wanted to ensure that we had the ability to reformat those items. So we made sure that we could handle up to 24 by 36 inches. There's really no upper page limit other than what is practical to capture the text to the page gutter. Most of the equipment that is being used by our vendor, which is Backstage Library Works in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, they could be using a Digital Transitions BC100. They could be using a copy stand with a phase 1 camera overhead. There might be some instances where robotic scanning is appropriate, although for much of these collections that's not likely, but I know that they do have those capabilities. If we were to scan materials in-house, we ourselves in Preservation Services have a Digital Transitions BC100 scanner with phase 1 P65 cameras, and we do all of our post-processing on phase 1's Capture One software. And just to give you a sense of the scale of this particular program, in this fiscal year, we've sent a little over 2,600 books, or nearly 750,000 pages, to Backstage Library Works for digitization. Our internal processes kind of ebb and flow with demand, so the numbers that we have there aren't quite as impressive. So let's move on here. For us, unlike other projects at the Library of Congress, this is an ongoing process for us. There are quite a number of digitization initiatives at the library. Our Prints and Photographs division, exclusively has their own workflow. Geography and Maps has their own workflow. Our Digital Collections Management and Services division typically runs most of the discrete projects for, say, rare books, manuscript division, and so on. And they get to deal with a lot of the, for want of a better term, sexy collections at the Library of Congress, the things that are, heavily used in many cases, things that might, really be of interest to the research community. But for the general collections, we estimate out of a collection of nearly 30 million books that at least 10% are embrittled or at risk of no longer being served. So our approach to digitization tends to be more of a process-based. So we tend to view things through a lens of production. How can we get the biggest bang for the buck for the dollars that Jake gives us every year? And it starts with making sure that we can track the item. And so the workflow considerations that we have is we start by inventorying everything that we get from the general collections. Inventorying for us is basically barcoding the item. That provides a unique identifier. As you can see in the photos that we have on the slide here. We enter the barcode into the ILS record. And then once that item has been pinned and linked, it allows us to import all of that ILS data into our own tracking databases, which of course then we can forward to the vendor when it comes to creating some additional metadata for delivery. Part of the process that we also do is we check for existing digital surrogates. If we can find another surrogate that exists elsewhere that, well, frankly, somebody else has paid to digitize, we're more than happy to piggyback off of that. And then, of course, that gives us a bigger bang for the buck and allows us to throw those digitization dollars at something that has yet to be digitized. So we'll go to some of the usual spaces. We'll go to HathiTrust, we'll go to Internet Archive, et cetera. And of course, if no digital surrogate exists, we collate the item. And collation in this case means that we get a page count. We do some general inspection to ensure that if special handling is required because of foldouts, maps, other considerations, that we make note of that. Our goal at this stage is to basically get a soft invoice in advance of sending the materials to the vendor, so we have a rough idea of what we're actually going to be spending. And once that shipment goes off the loading dock, we can subtract that from our pot of money, and we have an idea of what it is we have left to work with for the remainder of the fiscal year. So after collation, we put everything into our database, and then of course we can build shipments from there. We can manifest everything at that point and get that ready to go out for shipment to the vendor. Anything that's rejected from our workflow may either be directly returned to the collections management division, or in some cases may go to other areas of the preservation directorate for rehousing, or perhaps some additional work that might need to be done on the item. So let's advance. So we're going to take a look at some. We're going to briefly take a look at some materials that we've digitized. We'll do both an in-house scan and something that we've sent to the vendor. The pictures that you're seeing on the left are just, again, sample items that are indicative of the condition of the materials when they come into our spaces. On the right is our very own BC 100. And that's been an extraordinary workhorse for us, and is arguably one of the best book scanners for digital preservation on the market. So I'm going to attempt to toggle between presentations here. And mind you, if it's a little clunky, it's always the software and never the user. So where are we here? Okay. So this item here, Gondola and Palace, was scanned in our BC 100. This is publicly available on the library's website. I should note that when you do go to any of these presentations on the public website, the typical default page is to the single image. But if I can get that to go, but for presentation here, I wanted to default to the gallery. But we can just sort of quickly go through here. This does allow you to page through the item individually when the connection works. Here we go. And of course, the nice thing about these presentations, apart from their lovely images, of course, is we do have OCR behind everything too. So if you are trying to find something specific within the publication, you are able to input your search term. Anything that is found will be highlighted, And of course, you'll have the opportunity to scroll through the document for each instance of the hit. Since these are publicly available, you may also download a PDF version of this. You can download all pages. You can download JPEGs. You can download GIFs. You can also download a JPEG 2000. So we give you lots of different options to be able to engage with the materials. And this is what we've done in-house. The Century Book of the American Revolution, was scanned by our vendor. So the interface, as you can see, is still the same. I have defaulted to the gallery view here just because I think it's more interesting. But if we were to go to the single page, the connection's a little faster this time. Isn't that lovely? And as you can see, of course, this is a much larger publication, but the interface is still the same. You can view a single image. You can see a gallery or a grid. You can do a slideshow for presentation purposes if that's what you desire. PDFs are available for download, as are the other file formats. And our vendor, whom the library has been working with for quite a few years, both for digitization as well as microfilm, does a really wonderful job. The library engages with a number of other vendors in this space as well, and frankly, all of the vendors that the library has engaged with do wonderful work, and we're quite pleased for that. So let me toggle back to the presentation. I can do that, and here we go. Okay, and on to the next slide. So one of the other programs that the Preservation Services Division does for the library is we digitize foreign newspapers. It should be noted that through our overseas offices, the library collects foreign newspapers from all over the world. Where we can get them digitally, we do. In areas where digital copies or subscriptions are not available to us, the library subscribes and gets the original papers. In some cases, some of these are microfilmed overseas, and in other cases, they're sent overseas to the library, and then the content is selected for digitization, given to us, and we pass that off to our vendor. In some cases, we've also instituted a direct from the overseas offices straight to the vendor to sort of cut out the middleman, and that works quite well for us. In this case here, all of the newspapers that we work with are under copyright and therefore not available off campus through our website. The library has created a secure platform for rights restricted materials. Internally, we call it Stacks 3.0, and I believe this may have actually been lifted from the Copyright eDeposit software platform. And this provides us a secure method to be able to present rights restricted materials electronically throughout all of our reading rooms on campus. Since we are digitizing everything, the advantage, of course, as you can see, is that we're able to capture these materials in color, which is a big improvement over microfilm. And of course, there's OCR behind it as well. So for those of you who are used to scrolling through endless reels of microfilm searching for that little tidbit of information, now you can just pop your query into a search box, and the information, if it's there, will just pop right up. So reading the slide here, the reformatting project section creates master digital files of foreign newspapers from the following divisions. We work with the Law Library, the Serials and Government Publications Division, the European Reading Room, the African and Middle East Division, and the Asian Division. The newspapers that we tend to work with are contemporary, the vast majority of which don't go much further back than the 1980s, although I have occasionally seen The Asian division rather give us a few items from the 1950s, but those tend to be outliers. For this fiscal year, our target for digitization is 4.3 million pages. Next year, we are slated to do somewhere in the neighborhood of 5.3 million pages. And then the year after that, we'll be doing somewhere in the neighborhood of 6.3 million pages. Next year will be the last year that the Preservation Services Division microfilms foreign newspapers at all. So next year will be the last year that microfilm is produced by the Library of Congress in this case. We will completely switch over to a digital platform. We couldn't be more excited about that, of course. This has been several years in the making. We actually started on this road back in 2016 when we developed the JPEG 2000 technical specification, and we modified the metadata requirements from the Chronicling America website, or the National Digital Newspaper Program. So we came up with basically an NDNP light schema that has served us quite well. We wanted to have something that, while still robust, was a little less heavy technically and a little bit easier to maintain, and we think we've achieved that. So let's advance here. So if you are on campus at the Library of Congress and you are looking for any number of rights-restricted materials, you're going to wind up on the Stax 3.0 platform, and this is a picture of the landing page. And so you can see, if you can zoom in, if that's at all possible, we have about 135,000 books, about 528 newspaper titles, 219,000 issues, almost 1,000 journal titles, 87,000 journal issues, 687,000 journal articles. So we've got quite a bit of material, and of course these numbers change as more content is uploaded. You know, for those who are looking to quickly, easily access rights-restricted materials, this has turned out to be a wonderful platform. Now, of course, there's no downloads of the content, no emailing of data. We do need to respect the copyright of the materials, and so we are quite happy that this platform provides security for the newspapers and books that we digitize, and you'll find content available in multiple languages and genres, originating from 187 countries. So let's move on. So taking a look at some of the content that the Preservation Services Division has digitized within Stax, we've got a couple of screen captures here. So on the left, if we were to do a faceted search for English language newspapers originating from Mongolia, we have two hits, the Mongol Messenger and the UB Post. And then, of course, on the right-hand side, the screen capture is once we click into the Mongol Messenger, this is how one would access the individual issues. So we have a certain amount of data, being pulled from the records, place of publication, publisher, where it was published, language, et cetera, LCCN, of course. And the calendar view is also something that I believe was originally lifted from the National Digital Newspaper Program. So we've piggybacked off of existing technology wherever we could, and that has saved our programmers quite a bit of time, I'm sure. Let's move on and take a look at the Mongol Messenger itself. So I'm going to toggle yet again. Okay, so this is the Stax at a Glance page. And I thought I had the Mongol Messenger. No, I did not. Oops. And here we are. So within the Stacks program, a couple of things that might stand out. If you happen to work at the Library of Congress and you are logged in, it will say hello to you. And you'll also get a nice big sign up in the right-hand corner that reminds you that this is rights restricted material. Again, we see another version of that right here. But the information that we're getting from the newspaper itself, we get the date of publication, and this lovely color newspaper, which is clearly something that you wouldn't be able to enjoy with microfilm. Unlike the Chronicling America website, we present here at the issue level. Again, I think you'll find, if you were looking for something in particular, OCR will give you a hit. It will highlight the hit. Let's find something a little bit. Okay, so we do a search term here, so we get 27 hits on the word economic. This will take you all the way through the PDF. So just in terms of being able to navigate through the document itself, it makes it that much easier if you're trying to locate something. Naturally, of course, seeing a newspaper in color, I think, is a little easier on the eyes, we are extraordinarily happy with the results that we've been getting from our JP2 master. So that's what we have for foreign newspapers. Let me move back over to the presentation. And we'll talk about another program that we have in the reformatting project section, and that's our tangible media and forensics programs. The library still acquires quite a number of items that may have CDs at the back of the book. We already have a lot of existing collections with floppy disks of the 5 1/4 and 3 1/2 inch variety. If anyone has been using these types of media for a while, we know that media fail. Our job here, of course, is to get to it before the items actually fail, be able to copy them, put them into long-term storage, and make them available in the eventuality of that particular failure. So I'm sure any number of you here today have had CDs delaminate. Maybe floppy disks have failed for one reason or another. So our job is to work with a number of different divisions throughout the library, most notably the machine readable collection. But we also do quite a lot of work with manuscripts in the American Folklife Center. We've even done quite a bit of work with the Congressional Research folks to take materials and files off of any number of things, ranging from hard drives to thumb drives to iPhones. So the equipment that we work with for the straightforward CDs are just your basic rip station. We do have more advanced equipment for atypical collection materials. We have a couple of forensic recovery of evidence devices from Digital Intelligence. These towers run the Forensic Toolkit and Bit Curator. And these softwares allow us to plug in any number of things from CDs that may have failed on the RIP station for whatever reason, or perhaps we have a hard drive of collection materials that had been lurking in an office somewhere. That actually happened, and we pulled about 40 million files off of it at one point, which was quite exhilarating. And of course, we have quite a lot of collections, again, that may come on 3 1/2 or 5 1/4 inch floppy disks. which we really aren't able to access today. Even the CDs are somewhat difficult. Most of the library workstations these days no longer have drives for anything other than a USB port. So the item that you're seeing in the middle of your screen was put together by a staffer on my team, Miss Amanda May, who actually runs the Tangible Media program. And Amanda has concocted what she refers to as her Franken station. And so we have quite a lot of older equipment that we take advantage of because of their ability to handle, 3.5 or 5.25 inch drives. We're able to plug a number of somewhat obsolete technology into these things, and then plug those into the Fred stations, and we're able to recover all the data. So we generally tend to be more CD heavy just because of the nature of the collections, and we can in a good non-COVID everybody on site year process several thousand items through the RIP stations. That number tends to be a little lower as more people are teleworking, but the Fred stations wind up giving us quite a bit of materials to work with when we start dealing with collections that are on hard drives or thumb drives or other types of removable media. Sadly, most of these materials are also rights restricted, so the vast majority of them will wind up in the stack, in long-term storage. Most of them won't even make it to stacks, but toggle through here, you can find a handful of items that that were government publications initially, so the rights restrictions don't necessarily apply. And so part of our workflow for at least the CD part of the Tangible Media is, in addition to getting all the ones and zeros, capturing all the data and appropriately bagging that and placing that into long-term storage, we're also capturing a copy of the CD so that we can actually ensure that the item matches the files that we have. So this would be an instance of that. As you can see, this was from the Department of Health and Human Services. Government publications make it a little bit easier to work with in this regard. But the vast majority of the materials that we work with here are rights restricted. And again, our goal is to just be able to capture them, put them into long-term storage for the eventual failure of the item itself, and then we can reconstitute the materials perhaps on a new CD or whatever it is that the division would like us to do. So let's move on here. And talk a little bit about microfilm digitization. So the Preservation Services Division just concluded a microfilm digitization pilot. We are custodial for somewhere between 750,000 and 1 million reels of microfilm, quite a bit of which we produced in-house, quite a bit of which we've produced through contract. A lot of them are foreign newspapers. A lot of them are other collection items. But since we have agreed that that microfilm is largely going the way of the dodo, and now with the ability to present rights-restricted materials in the robust way that I've demonstrated, it became really easy to make the decision to say, okay, now it's time for us to turn our attention to digitizing the vast holdings that we have. So so we did a multi-award contract with 3 vendors, all of whom were well known to the library, and all of whom did wonderful work for the pilot. Our primary goal wasn't to really gauge whether or not they could do the work. We've worked with all three companies before, and we know they can do the work. A lot of it was really just sort of getting an idea of what the costs might be, going forward for a program of this nature. And so we did require some non-binding pricing from them just to get some ideas. But their deliverables also followed the same master file derivative package of a JP2 with a JP2 with a JPEG and a PDFA at the real level. We have also acquired, in support of this anticipated production, we've also acquired a Meckel Mach 10 scan system, which was actually delivered just last week. We still have yet to fully unbox and put it through training. But there are going to be a number of reasons why we may want to digitize in-house as well as work with a vendor. Some of it could be simply condition. Some things might be either too fragile or too valuable to either send off site or to hand over to contract staff. We may want to handle that reformatting in-house by ourselves. In some other cases, we might request or receive requests rather from some divisions who might want to front load certain collections over others. And so, we'll have that flexibility by having the ability to produce microfilm in-house. So in support of this anticipated production, and we do hope to kick production off by the end of the fiscal year, we're also going to be engaging in a full-on inventory of our vault, because it should be noted that it's, despite the fact that we will be sunsetting microfilm creation at the Library of Congress next year, our overseas offices are either still producing and or receiving microfilm. So the collections that we have in our vault will still be living. The vault will still be alive in that sense. And because it is a living collection, the materials have a tendency to get shifted around a lot to make room for incoming reels and new collections. So one of the things that we need to do to properly support this upcoming program is to create an inventory process for this. And we have the skeletal outlines for that for now, and that is something that we are working on. But we are, as a division, looking forward quite readily to being able to shift over to digitizing these wonderful treasures. I think you should, as a group, look forward to that a little later in this year. And so, in conclusion, here is some contact information. Our chief is Audria Henley. My counterpart, Greg Cooper, heads up our business operations support section. Greg also is in charge of the former micrographics section. So even though Greg has now got some additional duties, he still lords over all the microfilm and the vault. We recently had our section head from the preparation and processing section retire. So Audria, our chief, gets to do double duty as acting head. And of course, you see my name and my contact number, contact email. And now it's time for some Q&A. So I thank you very much for sticking around, and I'd be happy to take any questions right now.
Thank you so much, Aaron. That was a ton of information. We already have a number of questions in the Q&A. I also want to offer the opportunity for anybody who would like to verbally ask a question. If you want to just raise your hand, I will unmute you and you can ask Aaron your question directly. I'm going to start with a couple of questions to clarify things. Somebody was wondering what file formats you use now instead of TIFF.
So again, we are using a JPEG 2000 master that comes in at a 20:1 compression, which working with image scientists from our digital collections management team, as well as the head of our federal agencies digitization guidelines initiative group, Tom Rieger. We put together this JP2 master standard. And the Preservation Services Division, as well as many other digital initiatives throughout the library, are now using this instead of a TIFF master. I hope that clarifies things.
Yeah, perfect. And also, if you could describe what the ILS record is.
So the ILS record in this case, this is, you know, our integrated library system. This is our master database, if you will, of all the MARC records that the library uses. And so the ILS record would be, you know, the holdings and item records for, you know, say monographs. Serials records differ somewhat in how they're constructed, but this provides all of the basic metadata that, you know, we need as you know, digital library specialists to be able to digitize, you know, collections and, you know, pass off all of this information. So in essence, the vendors can give it back to us, say like in a METS mods format or something along those lines. And then of course the ILS is used quite heavily by all of our catalogers and reference librarians.
Great, thanks. So next we have a couple of questions about OCR. So let's move on to that. Sharon was wondering if there's OCR on the image files or if it's only on the PDF. If it is in the image, what is the process for accomplishing that?
So, it's not embedded in the image itself. The way that our display works, you know, we use a METS, you know, a XML METS approach to presenting things through Project One. So there actually is effectively a text file, you know, behind the images. So if you are using our Project One presentation and you're scrolling through the images as they are presented throughout the browser, you know, you'll be able to utilize the OCR within the document or the book to be able to get the hit that you want. We do use a PDF-A, which has OCR also embedded directly into it. So you know, the PDF is a little simpler. Of course, the presentation vehicle that the library uses for presenting public domain materials is slightly more complex.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
And you know, I mean, the OCR process is not 100% accurate. So how do you check those results?
We don't. Contractually, we are asking for uncorrected OCR. And this is something that the library does, as far as I'm aware, across the board. Corrected OCR would be astronomically expensive. That's not something that the library is willing to pay for. I do know that there may be some crowdsourced opportunities for enhancing OCR. There, you know, I'm not sure if the LC Labs folks are offering opportunities for that. I do know that there have been crowdsourcing opportunities for, you know, enhancing collections in the past. But when it comes to, you know, a lot of the digital collections that we have, most of the time, the vast majority of the time, the OCR, while not perfect, is pretty darn good. You know, we're getting high nines, you know, in terms of our percentage hits. Where we obviously fall flat is with handwriting, you know, maybe some super obscure fonts or you know, certain languages. But you know, if we're digitizing items in Arabic, Romanized characters, Cyrillic, I think you're gonna find that uncorrected OCR is still going to deliver some very, very good results.
Great, thank you. We have a couple of questions on the JP2 file format.
Sure.
One, do you have any documentation online, or do you know of any regarding that shift to JP2?
I would suggest you go to the FADGI website and look under still image, and you should find all the information available for that particular technical spec.
I don't have that specific page,
So it's
but I do have the FADGI guidelines in the chat.
okay. Yes. So right. So it's the Federal Agencies Digitization Guidelines Initiative, FADGI, and off the top of my head, I don't remember what the URL is, but if you
It's okay. I put the general one in the chat, so it's pretty easy to navigate that website. I think you should be able to find it from there.
Right. And again, you'll want to look under still. You'll want to go to the still image working group for that.
Still image working group. Great, thank you.
Sure.
Someone else has been asking. They've been scanning 2 TIFFs for preservation. And they are creating TIFF masters, but now they're converting to JP2s for storage savings. And they want to know if it's viable to get rid of the TIFFs after they have the JP2s.
Why not? I mean, I suppose that would largely depend on, you know, your institution, its mission, its goals, you know, what your curatorial staff, you know, ultimately require. But the Library of Congress, and at least for this particular, or for the workflows that I've, you know, described in this presentation, we bypass TIFF altogether. And if memory serves, Harvard University actually led the way by shifting away from TIFF to JP2. Oh my goodness, it probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 2015, 2016, something like that. Because, you know, anybody who works with TIFF, it's a wonderfully stable format, but it's just incredibly storage intensive. So if you have the wherewithal to bypass it for an equally stable or nearly equally stable, much less storage intensive format, by all means.
Great. Okay, so there's a few questions about the Stacks webpage.
Sure.
One, just to clarify, how do you access that?
Well, you have to physically be at the Library of Congress to do that. I'm not sure if our if Stacks is available in the House or Senate buildings. It's possible it might be. That information I don't have, but if you are off campus from the Library of Congress, you are unable to access these pages. So you need to be in a reading room or at some other library networked workstation.
Okay, thank you.
Amelia, can I hop in on that?
Yes, please.
Just some extra context on this that might be of interest. As Aaron mentioned, most of the work in newspapers and legal gazettes are relatively recent imprints. So we have intellectual property right management that we have to deal with. The library is currently embarked on a project that will lead to a 5-year next step in its digital collection strategy. And one of the issues we're looking at is rights management, how to implement interlibrary loan and sharing of digital resources while protecting the copyright that we're also responsible for as an agency. So this would be actually a great thing for us to think about a future webinar on as that strategy develops, so we can keep you all apprised of how we'll be doing rights management.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. I appreciate that. I wasn't sure if I wanted to dip my toes into the ILL waters, knowing that we still didn't have any clear guidance on that yet.
Okay, someone else wanted to know if the metadata or bag contents differ between the Stacks and the LC's public site.
No, they don't actually. The reason that we like to use an identical bag structure is because at some point we anticipate that content from Stacks will migrate to Project One. We're already in the process of working with the law library right now to identify a number of legal gazettes that we initially uploaded to the Stacks platform, but are now eligible for public presentation. So, so for us, it makes it a lot easier at the outset if we're able to cobble together, the same information across platforms, because it just makes migrating that information so much easier when the time is appropriate.
Okay, and also, how is the metadata generated for your reformatted newspapers?
So we provide all the basic metadata for the vendor. We'll have the LCCN, we'll have the title of the publication, the enumeration and chronology, date of publication, place of publication, whether it's a periodical or journal, something along those lines. So we'll provide all of the basic information that one might need to, spit back the metadata in the appropriate file format. I don't know off the top of my head what software programs Backstage uses to generate the XML, but I do know that the information that we provide for them is fed into a routine that is then able to come back with page level information as well as issue level information. I hope that's helpful.
Yes. Yes. Okay, I'm going to switch over to, there's several questions about the microfilm that we have. One, how do you access the custodial microfilm holdings? Is there a listing that's publicly available?
So I don't know that the ILS or the catalog.loc.gov will actually, when you say custodial holdings, are you referring to what division might be best associated with a given reel?
I don't know for sure. This is coming from somebody else, but I'm going to guess they just mean for the Library of Congress, because.
Okay. So we do have, so the catalog information should also include, some locational guide, shelf number, things of that nature within the record. So if someone is requesting a given a given reel of information, it should be noted also that some divisions will have service copies of their curatorial holdings, whereas the Preservation Services Division has the masters. So if I'm not mistaken, if you were to go to the online catalog and search, for a microfilm collection, very likely the information that you will find will be at the service copy level, not necessarily at the master reel level. So like if you go to find something for the Serials and Government Publications Division, and you want to view some of their holdings on microfilm, you're more likely to get their shelf number rather than ours.
Okay, and what do you do with the original media, whether it's microfilm or thumb drives or some other tangible media, once you've put that digital file into long-term storage?
Well, we give them back to the divisions that initially supplied them. So in the case of tangible media, let's say we're working with the general collections and the machine readable collection, which is a subset of that. We will coordinate, let's just say, regular deliveries of X number of book trucks of content. And once we're done processing those book trucks, we give them a call and say, hey, your stuff is ready, come on by and pick them up. And so they wind up going back into the stacks. For other collections, whether it's hard drives or thumb drives, our job is to process those collections in the agreed upon manner with, whichever division is supplying them. What happens to the originals once we're done processing everything and have it in long-term storage? I can't say. I don't imagine that the library is hanging on to thumb drives as a preservation or access medium. I would think that once we've processed the materials and uploaded them to secure long-term storage, I would imagine that the thumb drive might become, redundant or superfluous.
Aaron, I'd like to address the microfilm reels. The masters that we hold in our collection are sent to Fort Meade for long-term storage. Basically, we put them in the freezers, and we'll never get rid of those. So the digital file will be the surrogate, but the master will keep forever.
Yeah. By the way, that was Greg Cooper, the head of our Business Operations Support Services division section. So, and Greg also lords over the former micrographic section, as I mentioned earlier. So thanks for jumping in, Greg.
Sure, of course.
Does your vendor or your multiple vendors use the same scanning equipment as you have? And are there challenges to overcome when the institution and the vendor use different scanning hardware or software?
So the answer to that is sometimes. It depends on the company. Some vendors will use similar equipment. Some might use slightly different equipment. That isn't really our concern. We engage a vendor for their expertise and their ability to give us a deliverable to the specification that we require. It's not up to us to tell them what kind of equipment it is that they have to use. Case in point, some vendors, if we're scanning microfilm, might choose to use, for instance, NextScan equipment, whereas the Crowley company, which owns the Meckel brand, is going to use Meckel equipment. And now both of those brands are very well respected. Both of them are workhorses and have proven themselves in cultural heritage scanning for years. But we have two different systems utilizing two different types of software. Both are more than adequate for the task, but ultimately it really doesn't really matter. Are you able to produce, the output that I've requested, in a manner that handles the collections appropriately?
Thank you. For the tangible media preservation, is the effort to do bit level preservation only, or does the process allow to access content that requires specific software and hardware configuration?
So I know that the library has wrestled with virtual machines. There are a number of software programs that that we have that we've processed or that either require a certain type of hardware or platform in order to engage, and so you might, for instance, look to say our National Audiovisual Conservation Center in Culpeper to take a look more closely what they're doing, because we have worked on processing some old computer games for them. We've some computer games that were I think from the maybe as late as the 1980s, late 1980s, early 1990s. And those games cannot run on the platforms that we currently run at the library. So it's entirely possible that, say, the NAVCC could be standing up virtual machines to run these things. So, but that's not something that we get involved with. So while we do try to, work with collections at the bit level, we're not exclusively working in that area. We will work with other collections that are appropriate for the hardware that we have and the software programs that we have. Our job is then to process them to the specs of the supplying division. And what happens after that, we don't always have a say in.
Okay, thanks. So you clearly do a ton of output with this. Do you have any tips on designing like a digitization tracking database?
Oh, yes. So we currently work with Access databases, and we are pushing the edge of stovepiped standalone databases that may be able to talk to one another to create dashboards, we'll enter input, we'll enter some information in one database, and we can migrate it to another one in order to be able to generate a report, or what have you. I mean, if I had my druthers, I would really love to see a browser-based, SQL at the enterprise level. And we may get there one day, but because there are so many moving parts to digitizing a collection, and they differ for different parts of the library. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're not there yet, because there are multiple digitization initiatives at the library, and all of them have their own unique flavors of, requirements and completeness. But for what we do, I tend to view things at as sort of a production line. And so it's, you need staging space to take in your collections initially. You need to be able to process those items to whatever, degree that you feel is appropriate for your institution. In our case, finding a unique identifier, collating up front, trying to soft generate invoices so that you start with a big pile of money, you're getting a shipment ready to digitize with a vendor. You want to know roughly how much that's going to take away from your big pile of money, so you can appropriately plan ongoing work. You need to be able to track those materials as they go from your staging space to the vendor, and then of course when they get returned, you need to be able to check those materials in and make sure that there's a 1-to-1 ratio between what was sent out and what comes back. I mean, so there are a ton of elements, and depending on who's asking the question, email me. I'd be happy to have this conversation offline, and if I can help you devise something, I'd be happy to.